Welcome to my art history slideshow series where we're getting a brief introduction into some of the most famous painters in the modern era of art. Today we are going to look at the post-impressionism era from 1886 to 1905. I mentioned in the last slideshow that each era changes what is going on in the prominent movement. So they reject what is traditional, and they are usually called the avant-garde, the most cutting edge, most unusual, most experimental painters of a time tend to get grouped together and they are called the avant-garde. The avant-garde of this era they have put together and called post-impressionists. They have taken many elements from the Impressionist movement where they're working with the light and you can see the brush strokes, and their subject matter is much less formal. They have rejected the era that came before, both the realist movement and before that the romanticism, the perfect way that things were painted, and the way the artists have all been trained up in the same academy. These artists did not go to the academy. They reject the academy altogether. They're striving for their own style. So they are changing things that the Impressionists do. The Impressionists still are very much clinging to proportion, and the post-impressionists are starting to really get away from proportions. They're starting to express how they feel through their paintings less than exactly how they see things. And another big difference is the influences that come from outside of France. A lot of the painters were very enamored with Japanese style. Um, they Anything Oriental. Gauguin travels to Tahiti and brings back the Tahitian feel. Artists are painting jungles, and they're getting influenced by traveling shows, and they're learning more and more about the world, and they're coming out of Paris and either physically leaving Paris or painting what they imagine is beyond Paris. George Seurat, a very influential painter of the period. Any of you in my classroom know we have this broadly displayed in the art room. This painter was an architect. He was very enamored with science, and he developed the pointillism, which is used in this painting. This painting is, the colors are not mixed on a palette. They are dots placed side by side. So the purple in this woman's dress are a series of blue dots and red dots put side by side, and they're allowing your eye to mix them together to get that purple. So he was very much interested in science, and he brings a lot of geometry into this picture. And the aerial quality of it, where you can see into the river and you can see the bank beyond, it gives a very much aerial feeling to this painting. So this painting, oh, and another change that came about, this painting is enormous, enormous. The Impressionist painters typically had smaller paintings because their paintings were, a lot of them were taking place outside. They were working on capturing the moment, and they were working on capturing the light and the condition at a certain point in time. Whereas this picture was obviously done in a studio because it is the size of a wall. So artists were, again, back in the studio, and they were being more methodical about their paintings. They were taking their time and less interested in capturing a certain moment in time. This is an extreme example of his pointillism. The further away from this painting you get, the more you can actually see what it's about. His figures, Seurat's figures, are coming away from direct proportion. He is abandoning the need to have human proportions correct. Vincent Van Gogh. He is a very interesting character. He wanted the artists to come together. He's a Dutch painter. He is not from France. He moves into France. He comes from his family had wealth. They were not paupers, is what I'm saying. And he rejects that, and he leaves to become a pauper. He is fine with poverty, and he wants to live with other artists in a community, and he really longs for connection. He longs for artists to come together and be friends and comrades, and he spends a lot of time with Paul Gauguin, who we will talk about here in a few minutes. And he and Paul Gauguin and a third painter, and I have all three paintings in this slideshow, they paint themselves and then trade the paintings. They share the paintings, and that's their way of showing their appreciation for each other and coming together as a group of artists. Things were very shocking about this painting compared to the way things were done, and especially the colors. The color of that background was very unique for this time period and considered shocking at the time. Irises. This painting's been sold in my lifetime for an exorbitant amount of money. For a man that he was rejected in his own time period, he did not make money. He died before receiving any recognition. And for him to be one of our most beloved painters, it's a sad thing that he was not recognized in his day for his talent. Bedroom in Arles. Arles is a yellow house. This is the yellow house that he wanted. He wanted all artists or his artist friends to come and live with him together, and he wanted them to paint in the studio together and live in this yellow house all together. And this is the bedroom. Cafe Terrace at Night. This is another one that's in my art room. Oh, I love this version of it. Look at the brush strokes in that tree. I've never noticed that before. And all the brush strokes underneath the awning. So we talk about this painting in art class a lot. We talk about the colors. We talk about the light. We talk about the atmosphere, the way that it goes all the way back to the stars in the sky and how dark it is in the back versus how light it is here under the cafe awning. And of course, Starry Night. Starry Night being probably his most famous work. Paul Gauguin. This is the man that Van Gogh wanted to paint with, wanted to be friends with. They their friendship came and went, and in the end dissolved in an argument. And Paul eventually left for Tahiti on a permanent basis and left Van Gogh behind. This is the self-portrait that he dedicated to Van Gogh, and the third artist is there in the background on that little painting in the background. I just liked this one. As I told you um, in the last slideshow, that sometimes I just pick out these paintings. They're just ones that appeal to me. I would like to paint this. I would like to paint a painting that that is just like this one. In fact, we might. He left for Tahiti and began to paint these Tahitian women and his Tahitian style. Do you see how flat the painting is? The perspective starts to be all off. The perspective of their bodies, the tree is very, very one-dimensional or two-dimensional, just flat. And the colors are very tropical. Paul Cézanne, he comes more at the end of the post-impressionist period, and he really verges right up on um, surrealism or cubism, how the proportions start really getting more bizarre, and it's hard for your eye to make sense of what the artist is trying to come put forth. And you can see that here in Still Life Plaster with Cupid. There's a table, there's a foreground, and there's a background, and it becomes really difficult to figure out the depth, the positioning, even where they're at. It's a beautiful painting. It's well done, but he's really leaving behind the need to have perspective and proportions done correctly. Again, we have more still life from Cézanne. This one's more in keeping with traditional proportions. Henri Rousseau. Here we have Rousseau's The Dream, where it's very fantastical, where there's some creature playing a flute, and there's snakes and rhinoceros and lions and repeating shapes all throughout this picture. And he had not been to the jungle, but there was a traveling exhibit that had come through France, and he took the things that he saw in this traveling exhibit and he put them together in this painting. And there's a woman, and she's on this lounge chair in the middle of this dream, and it's very much like um, the women that have been painted in the past, in the Renaissance period, where they had been painted on chairs in opulent rooms. He does this where he puts the woman on a chair in the middle of the jungle, and it's very surreal. It's very unusual, and people had not seen anything like it at its time. Here is the third individual. This is Emile Bernard. He was in this group of Gauguin and Van Gogh, And this is the third of the portraits that go together, that they were trading to show camaraderie. Toulouse-Lautrec is a very interesting character. He he did some acting. He was very, very enamored with the Moulin Rouge, which is where the Can-Can girls were. And he painted posters, and he painted a lot of things to do with the theater. This is Ball at Moulin Rouge, and this shows the fine people would come and watch the Can-Can kind of girls dancing. And so there was this juxtaposition, the side by side of the well-to-do with the very more seedy elements of Paris. Sorry. Here we have at the Moulin Rouge again. We have a painted lady up front, and we have the gentleman. Again, it's where the two classes would come together. Jane Avril at the Moulin Rouge. She looks like a well-off woman who is coming to the Moulin Rouge. It's still a tourist place to this day. You can go to France and you can see the Moulin Rouge. It is still where Can-Can girls are there. Artists affected by the post-impressionists. The Scream. This is very, you can definitely see the influence of Van Gogh in his work. It was the same time period. He just was not in France with them when they were painting together. And Henri Matisse is very much was enamored with Cézanne, and you can see the lack of perspective, the lack of proportions in his work. And that concludes our slideshow on the post-impressionist movement. Let's go back. It is an extremely important period of time as far as art goes, and quite often these works are mistaken for regular Impressionism. But hopefully this gives you an understanding of who the main painters were. They were Van Gogh and Gauguin and Cézanne, and just how they changed Impressionism just enough to be their own movement. So now you would be ready to take in the teaching that goes on at Khan Academy. He has a class on post-impressionism, and there are two art critics that go to these paintings and discuss them, and it's very interesting to listen to. I've been listening to it for about 24 hours, and it's very well done. So I highly recommend that if you are still interested in post-impressionism at this point, that you study more and go to the Khan Academy site that I've included in the Google Classroom and take that in. Have a great week.